Humanity is innumerable, spread across the stars, with a military might befitting a galaxy-spanning empire like the Imperium. And yet, for all their numbers, there are a few individuals within humanity, or those who have ascended beyond it, who have become renowned even beyond their peers. In this series of vlogs, we shall take a look at some of those Adeptus Astartes of particular legend in this modern era, known collectively as the Champions of Humanity. Today, we're exploring an individual hailing from one of the most renowned chapters and legions in the history of the Space Marines. This individual is the most storied of all to hail from his Primarch's line, aside from the Primarch himself, and as you might expect, he commands his chapter. Even with the return of the Primarch in more recent times, he remains still as chapter master and lord of their homeworld, lord defender of their greater empire, and a warrior nearly without peer. He is the Lord Macragge, the former master of Ultramar, and the chapter master of the Ultramarines. He is Marneus Augustus Calgar. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to Champions of Humanity, a 40k Stories mini-series. The origins of Marneus Calgar are, sadly, shrouded in mystery and difficult to find, or at the very least I couldn't find them. We know he was almost certainly born on and recruited from the worlds of the Ultramar Empire, as those worlds form the recruitment pool of the Ultramarines today, just as they have always done. Given that Ultramar was shrunk by the Primarch Roboute Guilliman after the Horus Heresy, we have about 12 potential candidates for Calgar's home. Macragge is a likely candidate of course, but Calth, Conor and many others are still possible. It is also extremely likely he either volunteered or was offered to the Marshals of Induction of the Ultramarines by his family, passing the trials of the chapter as an aspirant and becoming a scout. Given the Ultramarines are the Codex-compliant chapter, he will of course have worked his way up through the ranks in the typical manner: Scout, Devastator, Assault, Tactical, Veteran, etc. But again, we lack details, dates, and such. In fact, honestly, we don't really have any clue about his time before becoming the chapter master of the Ultramarines. Everything I've said up to now is speculation just based off typical Ultramarine doctrine. Honestly, it is really frustrating that despite how renowned he's become as the chapter master, his history before that time is so damn empty. We don't even know exactly when he became the boss, nor do we know his predecessor, why he was chosen to succeed him, why his predecessor was killed, anything. As far as dates do go, we know he was chapter master in 698 M41, which is the first known mission he took part in as commander, and in fact the first time I can find his name in records. Before that, nothing's known for sure. All we know is, after his eventual ascension, he would take the titles of Lord Macragge and Master of Ultramar, the overall leader of the Ultramar Empire at that time, though how much day-to-day management he would have undertaken is less clear. This title has always been held by the chapter master of the Ultramarines, or by Roboute Guilliman of course, and there have been at least 18 of them. We have a name but no dates for the 17th Lord Macragge, and Calgar is the only one after them that we know of, so it's impossible to be sure exactly how many there have been. I'd probably wager, given it's been going for about 10,000 years, probably 30 to 50? I don't think it's going to be 100, but we'll have to, I honestly don't know. Calgar likely holds seat in the Fortress of Hera, the fortress monastery of the Ultramarines overlooking Macragge's capital that was actually built by Guilliman back in the day. However, it is not for his skill in diplomacy or politics that Marneus Calgar has become so renowned and lauded. He can do it for sure, you have to run an empire, but his true calling is undoubtedly as a warrior and a commander. After all, he doesn't have 28 full volumes dedicated to his deeds within the Fortress of Hera, more than twice any Ultramarine save Guilliman, for nothing. I mean, being chapter master for 500 plus years-ish probably helps, but sheer length of reign can't account for it all, can it? Nah, certainly not. As previously mentioned, the first battle Marneus Calgar is known to have fought in came after his ascension to Lord Macragge in 698 M41. This was the Corinthian Crusade, a large war centered on a Corinth system location unknown that was held by an Orc warlord. Calgar was, perhaps unsurprisingly, given overall command of the mixed Astartes and Astra Militarum force that included the Silver Skulls and the Lamenters, though we do not know if he took to the field much personally, as the chapter's ancient was the one to win the glory and slay the warlord at the cost of his own life. However, it was Calgar who ensured that the incredibly fortified world could be taken in the first place, orchestrating everything as he so often does with the tactical nous he is now renowned for. There is then a sizable gap of around half a century, as in 740 M41, Calgar led infiltration teams against the Iron Warriors Traitor Legion. Travelling to the world of Talwa, again location sadly unknown, Calgar and his Ultramarines were able to infiltrate and destroy an Iron Warrior stronghold known as the Fortress of Pain. The battle overall is described as the Siege of Talwa, so I assume there's a larger battle going on at the same time, but the details have been sadly lost. What hasn't been lost, however, is the next campaign that Calgar is known to have fought in, one of his worst defeats, followed up by one of his greatest victories: the First Tyrannic War. As Hive Fleet Behemoth rushed into Ultramar, consuming everything in its path, Calgar declared that the Tyranids would be stopped at Macragge, the only place even remotely nearby that would be capable of holding and stopping them. Before that, he had attempted to defend the agri-world of Prandium directly to Macragge's east, potentially just one system over from the heart of Ultramar's central sector. This did not go well, to put it short. The attempted defense failed miserably, and though they were able to retreat, the Ultramarines still regard Prandium's consumption as one of their greatest shames and failures. And then came the Battle of Macragge itself, which we recently discussed in our log on the Tyranid Hive Fleets. Calgar placed himself amongst one of the three major ground-based forces on Macragge, the largest of the armies dedicated to buying time, whilst the polar fortresses were fortified to be the anvils to break the Tyranids. Fighting rearguard after rearguard, Calgar and the many warriors with him held out time and time again to slow the hive mind down, but truly it was to no real avail. Calgar chose to make his stand at Cold Steel Ridge in the north of Macragge after the loss of many Ultramar auxilia to Genestealer infiltrators. But despite his forces coming to understand the basic tactics of the Tyranids, the hive mind had another ace to play: the Swarm Lord. The unique leader beast was spawned to counter the strategies of Calgar, who had been identified as the linchpin of the defence and the greatest obstacle in the way of Macragge's consumption. Countering every stratagem the Lord Macragge or the Ultramarines could conceive, the Swarmlord allowed the Tyranids to swarm over and take Cold Steel Ridge, and the Hive Tyrants even challenged Calgar one-on-one at the climax. Calgar was unable to match the beast, especially with no honour guard to protect him whilst the Swarmlord had plenty of help, and he was gravely wounded before the Ultramarines could scramble air support and evacuate him and the other survivors. Despite his injuries, Calgar was not out of the fight yet. He evac'd to space and the remnants of the battle fleet that originally defended Macragge, trying to lead hit-and-run attacks on the hive ship, the Behemoth. When said hive ships beat a retreat to the gas giant of Cirsa, trying to lure the Ultramarines into an ambush, Calgar pursued as the Imperials had an ambush of their own also planned. The outcome here was far harder to predict, but it ended decisively as the Hive Fleet was dragged into the warp by the willing warp core detonation of an Emperor-class battleship. Calgar and co. then rushed back to try and save Macragge from being consumed by the Tyranids who had already landed there, and they were able to do so. Just. The garrison of the northern polar fortress was dead to the last, and the southern one wasn't in much better shape. Thankfully, the Tyranids were stopped, and Macragge was saved before being consumed, the Ultramarines and the other defenders holding out long enough to save themselves. Calgar's command had likely been vital in buying time in the ground invasion, and likely this allowed the fleet to hold over Cirsa even if it wasn't his actions that would destroy the Hive Fleet. He then oversaw the long, arduous rebuilding effort that followed for the Ultramarines. Officially, it took 116 years to return to full operating strength, though Calgar also instituted perhaps the first deviation from the Codex Astartes in Ultramarines history in the aftermath. After seconding many warriors to the Death Watch to pass on their knowledge of the Tyranids, Chaplain Ortan Cassius asked for Calgar to form specialist squads that would become known as Tyrannic War Veterans. Calgar did not consent immediately, and many within the Ultramarines spoke out against the idea due to the deviation from the Codex Astartes that the Ultramarines regard as Holy Scripture. Not following it could be punished by a death oath, just ask Yo-Yo Ventress, so sanctioning the veterans was not something that could just be undertaken lightly. In response, Calgar held a great meeting known as the Conclave of Hera to allow everyone on all sides to make their points. After months of debate and then 40 days of fasting alone seeking the Emperor's guidance, the Lord Macragge laid down a gauntlet to Cassius and the wannabe veterans. By cleansing the planet of Espandor of Tyranids without a single loss, they proved their worth and were officially sanctioned as part of the Ultramarines. Of course, during this rebuilding process, the Sons of Guilliman were far from idle in their role as galaxy defenders, and Calgar fought along with them. Though the Blood Angels would come to aid them in cleansing the remnants of Behemoth, the first full campaign of the Ultramarines post-Tyranids came against the Eldari of Craftworld BL Tarn. Taking place on the world of Comrath, location again unknown, this was a response to escalating aggression from the Eldari when the planetary governor refused to give them the Scepter of Galaxian that had belonged to an Ultramarines hero named Aura that was in tune with him on the planet. Calgar led the fortification and defense in what would become known as the Battle for Aura's Sepulchre, countering first a head-on, then a more mobile Eldari defensive perhaps as fast as the Eldari command could conceive them. The arrival of an Avatar of Cain with the third wave finally did break the Ultramarine line, however, but Calgar was able to face down the Molten Being and somehow defeat it, breaking the Eldari morale and finally carrying the day. To prevent a repeat of the situation should the Eldari get fancy ideas again, the Spear of Galaxian was then taken with the Ultramarines back to Macragge for safekeeping. The Battle for Aura's Sepulchre is said to be the first battle that the entire Ultramarines chapter took part in after Behemoth, so instead this may have been the first one post-rebuilding completion. It is undated unfortunately, so I can't be sure whether this was the first timeline battle after Behemoth, or the first one after they got to full strength. During the rebuilding of the Ultramarines, the Scions of Guilliman also had to mop up their lost territory. Whilst dealing with remnants of Behemoth might be obvious, there was more to do than just bug extermination. The Masali system to the west of Macragge, for example, had been overrun by orcs, and Calgar personally led the operation to reclaim the agri-worlds known as the Three Planets that make it up. The Greenskins would actually be Calgar's next known victory on the world of Zalathras toward the end of the same century as Behemoth's coming, 797 M41 to be precise. What followed is either the most incredible testament of Calgar's martial prowess, or it's simple Imperial propaganda, if you choose to believe Iron Warrior's warsmith Honsu, who ridiculed the tale as such. It is said that the orcs could not breach the city gates of the world they were invading. Why? Calgar. This wasn't some mastermind defense with coordinated firepower and such. Oh, no. Instead, Calgar supposedly held said gates for an entire day, alone, without a single orc getting past him until the Ultramarines could regroup and rout the Greenskins. Sorry, Marneus, you're a badass, but I cannot bring myself to believe that with good conscience. I mean, maybe, but just seems too much to me. Whether this tale is hyperbole, it's flat out lies, or it's even the truth, will likely never be known save to those who were actually there with the chapter master, but it says a lot about Calgar that it's conceivably possible. I know I don't think it's true, but it could be, and that says a lot. In between these wars with the Greenskins, Calgar led the Ultramarines to a planet called Thrax, which was in the midst of a demonic incursion. The battle there can be seen either as a victory or a defeat depending on perspective. Vital data was recovered from Thrax's manufactorums, but the world itself was lost and Calgar was forced to enact exterminatus. I assume otherwise it would have ended up as a demon world, which is far worse. There were a series of battles that went on over the following 2 centuries against both traitor and alien alike. Putting down a rebellion on Nart's Landing, rallying a feudal world to defeat a force of Night Lords after being ambushed and crash landing there, or even trapping the Demon Prince, an old foe of the Ultramarines Mkar, in the warp core of a star fort with the aid of the Ordo Malleus. The tomb world of Damnos was reclaimed after the Necrons had driven the Ultramarines from it decades earlier, with Calgar taking a pivotal role in the battle. It was desperate rather than perhaps a calculated action, but it unleashed a transcendent Catan whilst also taking away much of the offensive power of the Necrons. Ocado Sicarius is credited with stopping the Catan, and the only way the war ended was when the tombs of the Necrons were annihilated systematically. Without Calgar's actions, there's likely far less chance that Damnos would have been retaken. There were then two pivotal battles in more recent history that Calgar took part in, one before the events known as the Gathering Storm, and one at their crux. The first was Ikar IV, one of the two decisive battles that saw the end of Hive Fleet Kraken as a major galactic threat. Admittedly, Craftworld Yandon and Prince Yirion must be credited with much of Kraken's fall, as the battle fought between the Eldari and the Hive Fleet saw more Tyranids committed and killed, but Ikar IV was damn vital too. Details of the battle are somewhat lost by comparison to the battle for Macragge, but between the introduction of Biotitans and the return of a long-believed dead Genestealer cult, it was no easy defense, let me tell you. Calgar brought his expertise to said defense, along with allies including, but potentially not limited to, the sides of the Emperor and the Lamenters. At the height of the Ground War, Calgar again faced the Swarmlord that had assumedly been spawned to counter him again like it had at Macragge. This time, however, the outcome was entirely different. Calgar actually slew the Swarmlord one-on-one, and deprived of their only strategic mind that could counter him, the Tyranids were eventually routed. Scant years later, as the 13th Black Crusade overran Cadia, Macragge itself was besieged once more by the forces of Abaddon's Black Legion, along with Iron Warriors, Night Lords, and other traitors. The War Master was elsewhere, however, likely recovering from being stabbed by Saint Celestine. During the siege, which actually reached the fortress of Hera itself, the survivors of Cadia under the aforementioned Celestine and Belisarius Call, and a certain Yvraine, made their way to the fortress monastery and met with the leaders of the Ultramarines, including Calgar. Call had a proposition for the Scions of Guilliman, their Primarch's resurrection. Calgar initially refused the Archmagos, perhaps unsurprisingly given the potential dangers of the plan and the presence of the two Ynnari in Call's shadow. As the Black Legion launched a final all-out assault, however, and after a full explanation from Call and a convincing backing from Chief Librarian Varro Jagurius, the Chapter Master acquiesced to the request to enter the Shrine of Guilliman. Perhaps this final assault was sensing what was about to come, but Calgar and the Ultramarines defended the shrine along with the Grey Knights and the Living Saint. All they had to do was buy time, and they did so. Just. Holding out long enough so that as the line broke, Roboute Guilliman returned, born again to turn the tide and rout the traitors totally. Once the immediate threat was dealt with, Guilliman was briefed by Calgar and co. on the state of the modern Imperium and resolved to head for Terra. Though elements of the Ultramarines would of course join him, Marneus Calgar was not amongst them. Instead, he retained the office of Chapter Master of the Ultramarines and was tasked with securing the rest of Ultramar from the traitor forces. However, though he kept his title of Lord Macragge, that of Master of Ultramar was stripped from him and returned to Guilliman. Instead, Calgar became known as the Lord Defender of Greater Ultramar, which is not actually a fancy title for the regents of the re-expanded empire, which instead was assigned to First Captain Severus Agaman. Calgar undertook his assigned task assumedly during the Terran Crusade, though it will likely have still been going on during the renowned Indomitus Crusade that Guilliman led after arriving on Terra. He then had a new problem to deal with, however: the Death Guard. Mortarion and his sons, along with other servants of Nurgle, launched an invasion into the northern reaches of Ultramar. Many systems were lost, and even Guilliman's timely return could not completely drive them out in what became known as the Plague Wars. Exactly where Calgar was and what he was doing during the wars, we aren't 100% sure. It is thought he was at Konor for one of the major engagements, and he was forced to put down uprisings in the Ultramar Auxilia. After the Death Guard withdrew, both due to a stalemate and to invasions of Nurgle's new territory by the other Chaos Gods, Calgar was later tasked with taking back the Tartella system in the north. As it stands, 3 worlds have been reclaimed out of a possible 7, with Calgar also managing to slow down a massive Orc army at the same time before it could reach the Forge World of Metallica. Assumedly, the Vengeance campaigns, as the reclaiming of territory post-Plague Wars are known, are still ongoing, with Guilliman called away and Calgar in command. Whether the Lord Macragge will be called to join the Lord Commander remains to be seen, though his stewardship of Ultramar will likely take precedence just as Dante's of Imperium Nihilus does. So that's the tale of Calgar told as best we know it, but as with Dante last time, let us look at the man's personality and equipment in something of a character profile before we move on. Calgar actually has two different suits of armour that he can use on the battlefield. A suit of artificer armour is one option, but the more famous of the pair is undoubtedly the Terminator armour known as the Armour of Antilochus. Though we sadly do not know who Antilochus was, I don't doubt he was a great hero of the Ultramarines, and the ornate armour to which he gives his name also incorporates a teleport Homer that is undoubtedly useful for summoning Terminator assaults or allowing for emergency reinforcement. Regardless of his armour, however, Calgar takes to the battlefield armed with the same signature weapons, the Gauntlets of Ultramar. These weapons are ancient, a pair of power fists recovered by Guilliman himself from a Chaos champion in an event known as the Gammalia Reclusium Massacre. We don't know when or where this was, unfortunately, but I would put a guess on the Great Scouring. They come with bolters incorporated into each gauntlet, and they are cased in adamantine. None within the Ultramarines have been able to crack them open to see how they work, which makes me wonder how they condone their use given how they were found. I assume the fact Guilliman recovered them, along with their name, makes me think the Primarch is somehow connected to the gauntlets. Given the Hand of Dominion, a weapon used by Guilliman in the Horus Heresy and today, follows a quite similar design, at least in its modern iteration, there might be some basis to that theory, though it is still just guesswork, really. Calgar also has a personal transport, a Land Raider known as Maximus. It's described as an old vehicle, which makes sense given its classic design, but we don't know when it was built, nor if it's been a personal transport associated with the office of Lord Macragge before. As for the Chapter Master as an individual, there's not a huge amount we know, and some of it might be hyperbole given some of his deeds as mentioned earlier. It is said that Marneus Calgar is utterly fearless, a paragon of the nobility of the Ultramarines, and I think I can see that mostly being true. He may likely hold the enemies of the Imperium in contempt with the same xenophobia and hatred as all Astartes, but he is honourable. On the planet of Malbede or Malbede, however you prefer, he allowed the town to evacuate before conducting exterminatus after the two had allied against newly risen Necrons. His tactical mind is renowned, as the battles he has won should have already told you, but unlike his Primarch back in the day, he is far from inflexible, able to think fast and adapt quickly to new situations. I mean, he's still stubborn to a fault on matters of the Codex, he's an Ultramarine so of course he is, but his implementation of the Tyrannic War Veteran shows he's not entirely closed-minded. It is said also that rather than diving for cover, he will quickly assess the situation and choose to dive for cover if it's the best course of action. If someone can truly think that fast, then, well, fair play, I suppose. Obviously, more recently, Calgar has basically found himself demoted with Guilliman's return. I mean, he's still Chapter Master and Lord Macragge, but he's no longer Master of Ultramar, and he's not really the leader of the Ultramarines anymore now that the Primarch's back. On top of that, the relationship between Chapter Master and Primarch is, well, it's frosty to say the least. Whether directly or indirectly, Guilliman has challenged, undermined, and admonished Calgar multiple times, and though he hasn't said it aloud, it's becoming more and more apparent that the Primarch doesn't exactly trust Calgar these days, if he ever did. For example, when the Tetrarch system was re-implemented in Ultramar following the Indomitus Crusade, Guilliman said that he would remain in Ultramar for a while until he was satisfied with how everything was done. If you trusted Calgar, who was technically Macragge's Tetrarch in all but name and was his effective second, why not just let Calgar do it? Trust it would be done in a satisfactory manner by his number two. In any event, there is a not insignificant friction between the two at this point. But will it lead to anything? Who knows? Undoubtedly there'll be those speculating that Calgar may well secede from Guilliman's empires or even rebel against him eventually. Whether it be chaotic corruption is another debate, but it will be an interesting thread to follow should it come to pass. Personally, I'm not sure that's going to happen. I mean, Calgar is exceptionally loyal, even if he has his issues with Guilliman. I think loyalty to the Emperor comes first, and I think he knows he's the Emperor's son. He's kind of not going to win a loyalty to the Emperor argument with Guilliman. I don't know. I don't think it's likely, but never say never. So ends the tale of Marneus Augustus Calgar, at least for the moment. Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, Lord Macragge, destroyer of probably one and a bit hive fleets through his tactical acumen. Whatever you think of him and his brothers, Calgar is not an individual you trifle with lightly. Admittedly, things now are changing, and perhaps not in a good way for Calgar. Unlike fellow legendary Chapter Master Dante, who has earned Guilliman's respect and trust as we have seen, his path in this new age is far less clear. Time will tell whether things take a true downturn for Marneus Calgar, but it is an interesting situation nonetheless. But even if it all goes south, take nothing away from his achievements before and after the return of Guilliman. This has been the second part in our Champions of Humanity mini-series, looking at the most legendary of the Astartes in the modern era. I suspect we'll be back in Ultramar again at some point during these logs, but that is for the future. For the present, next time I wish to discuss a group of Astartes that truly are unique. No one knows who they are, no one's exactly sure what they are, but they show up exactly where they're needed to deliver the Imperium from disaster. Thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis and the second part of Champions of Humanity, a 40k Stories mini-series. I'll see you all again. Goodbye.